Within hours of her children vanishing into thin air, a mother in Nova Scotia deleted an app from her phone. Not a game. Not social media. A communication app that creates secondary phone numbers. An app that lets you text and call people without using your real number. An app that stores everything on remote servers, even after you think it's gone. And when investigators asked her why, she said she just didn't need it anymore. Does that sound like something an innocent parent would do while their babies are missing? Drop a comment right now with the first word that comes to your mind when you hear that, and tell me where you're watching from, because this case has haunted an entire community and I need to know it's reaching people who care. If you're already feeling that knot in your stomach, that instinct that something is deeply, horrifically wrong here, then stay with me because you need to hear what else investigators found. And if you want to see justice for Lilly and Jack Sullivan, hit that subscribe button right now because we're about to go deep into one of the most disturbing missing children cases in Canadian history, and I promise you by the end of this, you'll understand why this isn't just another case of kids wandering into the woods. 6-year-old Lily Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack disappeared from their rural Nova Scotia home on the morning of May 2, 2025. Their mother, Malaya Brooks Murray, called 911 at 10:01 a.m. from their mobile home in Lansdowne Station, Pictou County. It's a small, tight-knit area where everyone knows everyone, the kind of place where kids should be safe, where neighbors look out for each other, where something like this shouldn't happen. She told the dispatcher that her children had wandered off. Just wandered off. Like it was a simple mistake, an oversight, something that happens to tired parents everywhere. The police arrived 26 minutes later. By then Lily and Jack were gone. Vanished. And in that 26-minute window, a clock started ticking that has never stopped. Every second that passes makes it less likely these children will be found alive, and everyone in that community knows it. Malaya told investigators that she thought the kids, who shared a bedroom together, had slipped out while she was dozing that morning. She said she heard them giggling around 8 a.m. Giggling. That sound every parent knows, that bubbling laughter of children who think they're getting away with something, who are delighting in their own mischief. It's a sound that usually makes you smile even when you're exhausted. But this time, that giggling would be the last sound anyone would confirm hearing from Lily and Jack Sullivan. By 9:40 a.m. Malaya said, everything had gone quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes a parent's heart skip. And that's when the panic should have set in immediately. But the 911 call didn't come until 10:01. What happened in those 21 minutes of silence? What was Malaya doing? What was she thinking? Was she searching? Was she calling their names? Or was she doing something else entirely? Her partner, 37-year-old Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, checked the front door when he realized something was wrong. Now here's where things get strange right from the start, and I want you to really think about this detail because it sets the tone for everything that follows. Daniel had placed a wrench against the front door the night before. Not a lock. Not a deadbolt. Not a chain. A wrench. He said it was to keep the door secure because they were worried about a bear. A bear. In a home with 3 small children, including a 16-month-old baby, the security measure for the front door was a wrench leaned against it. Think about that for a second. If you were truly worried about a bear getting in, wouldn't you get a proper lock? And if you were truly worried about your kids getting out, wouldn't a wrench on the ground be incredibly easy for a 6-year-old to move? Comment below if you think this makes any sense at all, because to me, this sounds like the kind of detail someone makes up when they're trying to explain something that doesn't have a good explanation. When Daniel checked that front door, he found the wrench still in place, exactly where he'd left it. So he figured the kids must have gone out the back sliding door instead. The back sliding door that apparently had no wrench, no lock, no nothing to keep 2 small children from wandering out into the Nova Scotia wilderness in early May when temperatures at night still drop close to freezing. But let's pause here and rewind even further, because the last time anyone can confirm with absolute certainty that they saw Lily and Jack Sullivan alive and outside of that home was actually the day before. May 1, 2025, at 2:25 p.m. There's video footage. Security camera footage from a Dollarama store in New Glasgow, about 20 kilometers away from their home. In that footage you can see Malaya, Daniel, Lily, Jack and their baby sister Meadow, who was only 16 months old. Such a sweet name, Meadow. It makes you think of sunshine and flowers and innocence. The family was running errands that afternoon, just normal family stuff. They grabbed poutine at a Acropolis pub and grill. They hit a pharmacy. They went through a Starbucks drive-thru and possibly stopped at Tim Hortons too. It was a long day of errands with 3 small kids, the kind of day that exhausts any parent. They got home late that evening. Later than usual. Malaya told police that she tucked the kids into bed around 10 p.m., which was 2 hours past their normal 8 p.m. bedtime. And here's another detail that investigators noted, another small thing that individually might mean nothing but starts to form a picture when you put it all together. The kids went to bed still in their day clothes. Lily was wearing a pink sweater, pink pajamas with white shapes on them and a Barbie top. Jack was in black sweatpants, a t-shirt and a diaper. A diaper. Jack was 4 years old and still in diapers, still not potty trained, and he went to bed in the same clothes he'd been wearing all day while the family ran around town. Malaya said she was too tired to unpack the clean laundry they'd done the day before, so she just put them to bed as they were. She shut their bedroom door, went to her own bed with baby Meadow, and told police she didn't even know what time Daniel came to bed that night. Those were the last moments anyone can verify that Lily and Jack were tucked safely in their beds. The last moment of normal. After that, we only have the word of the adults in that house about what happened next. And this is where I need you to really pay attention because the story gets stranger and stranger the more layers you peel back. If you're still with me, if you're feeling that growing sense of dread about where this is going, leave a like on this video right now so I know you're invested in finding out what really happened to these children. Because what came next, when the sun rose on May 2nd, would set off a massive investigation that would uncover details nobody expected. Details about deleted apps and torn blankets and mysterious sightings and a family with secrets that ran deeper than anyone in that small Nova Scotia community could have imagined. The question isn't just where are Lily and Jack Sullivan. The question is, did they ever leave that house on their own at all? Let's go back to May 1st, 2025, and walk through that day minute by minute, because this is the last day that anyone outside the family can confirm they saw those children alive. This is the last day of normal. The last day before everything changed. And when you look at the details of this day closely, when you really examine what this family was doing and how they were moving through the world, you start to see things that don't quite fit the picture of a happy family just going about their business. Before we go further, if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because cases like this need attention. They need people who care enough to keep asking questions, and your subscription tells the algorithm that this story matters, that Lily and Jack matter. The day actually started on April 30th, the day before, and understanding that day gives us context for what came next. On April 30th, Malaya, Daniel, Lily, Jack, and baby Meadow went to Malaya's grandmother's house in Millbrook to do laundry. Think about that for a second. They had to leave their home and go to a relative's house to wash their clothes. This tells us something about their living situation, about their resources, about the kind of life these children were living. After doing laundry, they stopped at an Ultramar gas station, bought a vape for Daniel, grabbed some groceries and finally got home at 10:19 p.m. That's late. That's late for small children who should have been in bed hours ago. But nobody tucked them in at a reasonable hour that night either. This seems to be a pattern. So now we're at May 1st and here's what we know for certain. The kids stayed home from school that day. Both Lily and Jack had coughs, Malaya said. Nothing serious, just the kind of spring cold that kids get. So instead of sending them to school, she kept them home. And rather than having a quiet, restful day where sick kids could recover, the entire family loaded up again and headed out for another marathon errand day. They drove to New Glasgow, 20 kilometers away. First stop, Dollarama. This is where we have that security camera footage at 2:25 p.m., the last confirmed visual evidence of these children outside their home. Can you imagine what investigators felt when they watched that footage? Seeing Lily and Jack walking through that store, alive and real, not knowing that within 24 hours they would vanish and that image would become the last proof that they existed in the world? It's haunting. Comment if you think about how many times we're all caught on security cameras every day, living our normal lives, never knowing which moment might be the last record of us. After Dollarama, the family hit a pharmacy. Then they went to Acropolis Pub and Grill where they got poutine for the kids. Poutine, for those who don't know, is a Canadian dish of French fries covered in gravy and cheese curds. It's delicious, it's comfort food, it's the kind of thing kids love. Did Lily and Jack enjoy their poutine that day? Did they make a mess? Did they laugh? We'll never know those details. After the restaurant, they possibly went to Tim Hortons and definitely went through a Starbucks drive-thru. Again, this is a long day for children who are supposedly sick with coughs. Most parents would have sick kids resting at home, maybe watching cartoons, maybe taking naps. But not this family. These kids were dragged through hours of errands while not feeling well. They finally got home that evening and Malaya told investigators she fed the kids supper. What did she feed them? We don't know. She said she let them watch TV afterwards and maybe she wasn't sure, they might have played outside for a bit. Maybe. She wasn't sure. How does a mother not remember if her children played outside on what would turn out to be the last evening she'd ever spend with them? After TV and possibly playing outside, it was time for bed, but remember they got home late and it was already past the kids' normal bedtime. Malaya said she was exhausted. The clean laundry from the day before was still packed up, not put away. She couldn't face the task of getting the kids into proper pajamas. So Lily went to bed in her pink sweater, her pink pajamas with white shapes, and her Barbie top. Jack went to bed in black sweatpants, a t-shirt, and his diaper. The same clothes they'd been wearing all day while running errands in multiple stores and restaurants. Here's what strikes me about this, and I want you to really think about it. These children went to bed at 10 p.m., 2 hours late in their day clothes, one of them still in a diaper at 4 years old, after being dragged around town while sick. This speaks to a home environment where structure was lacking, where the children's basic needs and routines weren't being prioritized. I'm not saying this makes anyone guilty of anything criminal, but it paints a picture of chaos, of overwhelm, of a family barely holding things together. And in cases like this, that context matters. It matters because it helps us understand what kind of pressure these adults were under, what their state of mind might have been, what they might have been capable of if they were at the end of their rope. Malaya shut the bedroom door after tucking the kids in. Lily and Jack shared a bedroom, just the two of them in that small mobile home. She went to her own room with 16-month-old Meadow. And here's another detail that investigators noted in their reports. Malaya told them she didn't know what time Daniel came to bed that night. She went to sleep and wasn't aware of when her partner joined her. Why does that matter? Because it means there's a window of time that evening where Daniel's movements and activities are unaccounted for. What was he doing? Where was he? Was he checking on the kids? Was he making sure that wrench was properly placed against the front door to keep out the bears? Or was he doing something else? The home they were living in was a mobile home on Gearlock Road in Lansdowne Station, Pictou County. For those unfamiliar with the area, this is rural Nova Scotia. Dense woods, quiet roads, scattered properties, the kind of place where your nearest neighbor might not be able to hear you scream. It's beautiful country, but it's isolated. If something happened to those children, if someone took them, if someone hurt them, there wouldn't necessarily be witnesses. There wouldn't be street cameras or nosy neighbors watching through their windows. There would just be trees and silence and the vast Canadian wilderness that could swallow evidence whole. And living on that property with Malaya, Daniel, and the 3 children was Daniel's mother, 60-year-old Janie McKenzie. She lived in a camper right there on the same property. So there were 5 adults worth of eyes and ears on that property, 6 if you count baby Meadow, who obviously can't tell us anything, and yet somehow 2 children would vanish the next morning without anyone seeing or hearing anything definitive. That night of May 1st, after the long day of errands, after the late dinner, after putting the kids to bed in their day clothes, the house went dark and quiet. Somewhere in those woods around the property, the Nova Scotia wilderness settled in for another spring night. The temperature would drop. Animals would move through the darkness. And inside that mobile home, Lily and Jack Sullivan were breathing their last hours in the place they called home, though nobody knew it yet. Their pink and black clothing, the exact outfits they'd been wearing all day, would become the description police would desperately circulate to the public. Those specific details, that pink sweater, those black sweatpants, that Barbie top, would be printed on missing posters and shared thousands of times online by people praying for their safe return. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night about May 1st. This was a completely ordinary day for this family. This chaos, this lack of routine, this dragging sick kids around for hours, this putting them to bed late in their day clothes, this wasn't some aberration. This was normal. This was just how things were done in that household. And if this was normal, if this was the baseline, then what else was normal that we don't know about yet? What else was happening in that home that seemed fine to the people living there but would horrify anyone looking in from the outside? The last day anyone saw Lily and Jack wasn't special. It wasn't memorable. It was just another day of barely getting by, another day of doing the minimum, another day where 2 small children deserved better than what they were getting. And then the sun set on May 1st, and when it rose again on May 2nd, those children would be gone, and this ordinary day would become extraordinary for all the wrong reasons. The last day would become the last day, and everyone who saw that security footage from Dollarama would have to live with the knowledge that they were looking at ghosts, at children who were already running out of time even as they walked through that store with no idea what was coming. May 2nd, 2025, started like any other morning in Lansdowne Station, Nova Scotia. The sun came up over the dense woods surrounding Gearlock Road. Birds started their morning songs. The spring air was crisp, still carrying that edge of cold that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter. Inside the mobile home where the Sullivan children slept, something was about to go terribly, irreversibly wrong. Or perhaps something had already gone wrong hours before in the darkness, and the morning was just when people would start to notice. Stay with me here because the timeline of this morning is crucial, and there are gaps in it that investigators still can't explain. Gaps that might hold the answer to everything. Around 8 a.m., according to multiple witness statements, someone heard children. Specifically, they heard giggling. That unmistakable sound of kids who think they're being sneaky, who are delighted by their own mischief. Malaya Brooks Murray, the children's mother, told police she heard Lilly and Jack giggling in their shared bedroom around this time while she was dozing. She didn't get up. She didn't check on them. She heard them and just lay there, somewhere between sleep and waking, letting the sound wash over her. Every parent knows that feeling. You hear your kids are awake and you're so tired that you just want 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes, you tell yourself they're fine, they're just playing, you'll get up soon. But soon becomes later and later becomes too late. Daniel Martel's mother, Janie McKenzie, who was living in a camper right there on the property, also gave a statement to police about that morning. She said she heard Lilly and Jack playing on the swings outside and laughing around 8:50 a.m. Notice the time difference. Malaya heard giggling inside at 8 a.m. Janie heard playing and laughing outside at 8:50 a.m. That means at some point in that 50-minute window the children left the house. They went from their bedroom through the mobile home and outside to the swings. Did they go out the front door where that wrench was supposedly keeping out bears? Or did they go out the back sliding door that apparently had no security at all? And most importantly, did they go alone or did someone take them? Janie said after she heard the kids playing and laughing at 8:50 a.m. she dozed off. Just like Malaya, just like everyone in this house that morning, she heard the children and then fell back asleep. When she woke up, it was to the sound of her dog barking and Daniel yelling for the kids. That's when everything exploded into panic and chaos. But here's the question nobody seems to have asked loudly enough. Why was everyone sleeping so late on a weekday morning? Why weren't these children up and getting ready for school? May 2nd was a Friday. Schools were in session. Lily was 6 years old and Jack was 4. They should have been enrolled, they should have been on a schedule, they should have had somewhere to be. But instead, everyone in that house was dozing in and out, and the kids were apparently free to roam as they pleased. By 9:40 a.m. Malaya said she realized it had gone quiet. Too quiet. That parental sixth sense kicked in, the one that knows the difference between kids playing happily and the eerie silence that means something is wrong. She got up. She looked for Lily and Jack. They weren't in their bedroom. They weren't in the house at all. She must have called for Daniel. Can you imagine that moment? That split second when you realize your children aren't where they should be, and your heart drops into your stomach, and the world suddenly feels like it's tilting? 4:21 minutes, between 9:40 a.m. when Malaya realized the kids were gone and 10:01 a.m. when she called 911, something was happening in that house. What were those 21 minutes? Were they searching? Were they panicking? Were they discussing what to say? We don't know, and that gap haunts this case. At 10:01 a.m. the call finally went out. 911, my kids wandered off. That's the story. That's the official version. 2 small children, 6 and 4 years old, one still in a diaper, somehow left their rural home in the early morning and wandered into the vast Nova Scotia wilderness. Police were dispatched immediately. In cases of missing children, every second counts. The first few hours are critical. Everyone knows this. Everyone in law enforcement, everyone in the community, everyone watching the news knows that when kids go missing, you have a tiny window to find them before the statistics turn grim. The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, arrived at the mobile home on Gearlock Road at 10:27 a.m. 26 minutes from call to arrival, which is actually decent response time for a rural area. But 26 minutes is an eternity when children are missing. By the time police arrived, Lily and Jack were gone. The house was there. The adults were there. Baby Meadow was there. But the 2 middle children had vanished as if they'd never existed. Daniel Martel told responding officers his version of events. He said that when he realized the kids were missing, he had checked the front door first. That wrench he'd placed there the night before to keep out bears, it was still in place. Still exactly where he'd left it. So in his mind, that meant the kids couldn't have gone out the front. They must have gone out the back. The sliding door. The door with no wrench, no security that he told police he'd already searched the woods around the property, looking for them, calling their names. And then he said something that nobody expected. He said he heard a scream. A scream that sounded like Lily and Jack. But there was a helicopter overhead, because by this point the search was already ramping up, and the helicopter noise drowned out the scream that he couldn't tell where it came from. He couldn't follow it. It was just there for a moment and then lost in the mechanical thunder of the search helicopter. Now think about that statement. Really think about it. Daniel says he heard what sounded like the children screaming while he was searching for them. That should be a critical clue. That should have sent searchers in a specific direction. But he can't say where the scream came from because a helicopter was overhead. How convenient is that? How perfectly does that explain away why he couldn't locate the source of a sound that might have led to the kids? I'm not saying he's lying. I'm saying it's a detail that's almost too perfect, too tidy of an explanation for why a potentially crucial clue went nowhere. Drop a comment and tell me if you think that scream was real or if it was something else. Tell me what you think really happened in those woods that morning, because I guarantee you, investigators were asking themselves the same questions. The RCMP didn't waste time. Within hours they had launched a massive search operation. We're talking about 8.5 kilometers of dense Nova Scotia woods being combed by search and rescue teams. Helicopters in the air. Drones with cameras flying grid patterns. Search dogs with their handlers working in teams. Over 100 volunteers from the community, because when kids go missing in a small town, everyone shows up. Everyone drops what they're doing and joins the search. They were looking in wells. They were checking old mine shafts. This is terrain that's beautiful but dangerous. There are places a small child could fall, places where they could get trapped, places where they might never be found. And as the hours ticked by with no sign of Lilly and Jack, the dread in that community was building like a storm cloud. But while volunteers were out searching the woods, while helicopters were circling overhead, while search dogs were tracking through the underbrush, investigators back at the house were making a discovery that would change the entire complexion of this case. On that same day, May 2nd, while the search was still in its earliest hours, relatives of Malaya who had come to help search made a finding that stopped everyone cold. About 1 kilometer from the house, a full kilometer, they found a piece of fabric tangled in a tree. Not just any fabric. A piece of Lily's pink LOL doll blanket. The blanket that she loved, that she slept with, that was hers. A piece of it was torn off and stuck in a tree a kilometer away from her home. How does that happen? How does a blanket travel a kilometer from a house and end up torn and tangled in tree branches? 6-year-olds don't wander a kilometer carrying blankets and accidentally leave pieces behind. That's not how children walk off. That's how something else happens. That's evidence of movement, of transportation, of someone or something carrying that blanket through the woods. And it gets worse. Later that same day, searchers found another piece of the same pink LOL doll blanket. This piece wasn't in the woods. It was in a trash bag at the end of the driveway. The driveway of the mobile home where Lilly and Jack lived. So now we have pieces of Lily's blanket in 2 completely different locations. 1 kilometer away in a tree and right there at the house in the trash. When police asked Malaya about this, she had an explanation ready. She said she had thrown the blanket away because it was getting warmer, spring was here, and Daniel had been using that blanket to block a draft in the house. Now that they didn't need it for the draft anymore, she tossed it. That's the story. A mother throws away her daughter's beloved blanket at the exact time her daughter vanishes. And it's just a coincidence. One piece ends up in the trash at the house, and another piece somehow ends up a kilometer away in a tree, and we're supposed to believe this is normal behavior. Ask yourself, if your child had a special blanket, a comfort item, something they loved, would you throw it away? And if you did throw it away, how would pieces of it end up scattered across a kilometer of woods? This blanket is one of the most damning pieces of physical evidence in this entire case, and investigators knew it the moment they found it. A search dog was brought to the location where the blanket piece was found in the tree. These are trained dogs, dogs whose entire purpose is to track human scent. They can follow a trail that's hours or even days old. They can find people in conditions that seem impossible. But when the dog was brought to that blanket, when it was given the scent and told to search, it found nothing. The dog couldn't pick up Lily or Jack's scent near that blanket at all. How is that possible? If the children walked there, if they touched that blanket, if they were anywhere near that location, the dog should have found something. The fact that it didn't means one of two things. Either the children never actually touched that blanket piece after it left the house, or someone else moved it, or something is interfering with the scent trail. None of those options are good. All of them point to something more sinister than 2 kids wandering off to play. Police also found boot prints on a nearby pipeline trail. Multiple prints, including a child-sized boot print, size 11, which matched Lily's shoe size. They found a sock. They found a scrap of purple fabric, origin unknown. And bizarrely, they collected some scat, feces, that might have been human or might have been animal. They bagged it and sent it to the lab because when you're searching for missing children, you investigate everything, even the things that seem unlikely or disgusting. You follow every lead because you never know what might crack the case. All of this evidence was cataloged, photographed, analyzed. And while the physical evidence was being processed, investigators were building a timeline, interviewing witnesses, and starting to ask the hard questions that nobody wants to ask when children are missing. Questions about the parents. Questions about the home life. Questions about what really happened in that mobile home on Gearlock Road between the night of May 1st and the morning of May 2nd. The morning that changed everything wasn't just about the children vanishing. It was about the response to that vanishing. It was about the gaps in the timeline. It was about the contradictory statements and the physical evidence that didn't match the story being told. And as the day wore on, as the sun started to set on May 2nd and Lilly and Jack were still missing, still somewhere out there or gone forever, the community was gripped by horror and the investigators were gripped by suspicion. Because nothing about this morning made sense if you believed the official story. But it started to make a different kind of sense, a terrible sense if you considered that maybe, just maybe, those children never walked out of that house on their own at all. When you're investigating a missing persons case, especially one involving children, the physical evidence should tell a story. It should create a narrative that makes sense, that follows logic, that points you in a direction. The evidence in the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan does tell a story, but it's not the story that the adults in their lives were trying to tell police. It's a story full of contradictions, impossibilities, and details that make experienced investigators stop and say, wait, that doesn't work. A woman in her 50s or 60s wouldn't necessarily raise suspicion. She could pose as a grandmother. She could seem safe. Children would be more likely to approach her than a strange man. If this is what happened, if a trafficking ring was involved, then Lilly and Jack could be anywhere by now. They could have been transported out of Nova Scotia within hours of their disappearance. They could be in another province, another country. They could be alive but being held somewhere, used for purposes too horrific to detail here. I don't want to believe that's what happened. I want to believe they're still findable, that there's somewhere that can be traced, that there's still hope. But when you look at the totality of the evidence, when you consider the lack of physical traces in the woods, the strategic placement of that blanket piece, the deleted app on Malaya's phone, and now this sighting of children matching their general description with an unknown woman and a vehicle with an open door, you have to consider every possibility. You have to think about scenarios that make your stomach turn because that's how you find missing children. You can't limit your investigation to only the comfortable theories. You have to explore the dark ones too. There's one more detail about Natasha's sighting that I need to emphasize because it's crucial. She said the children were walking toward Westville, not toward the house. They were heading away from Gearlock Road, away from their home. If they were lost, if they had wandered off and were trying to find their way back, wouldn't they be going in random directions, doubling back, showing signs of confusion? But these children were walking in a specific direction with apparent purpose, holding hands, moving toward a destination. That's not the behavior of lost, frightened kids. That's the behavior of children who are being led somewhere, who think they're going to a place that's safe or interesting or worth walking to. Someone convinced them to come along. Someone gave them a reason to leave their home and walk away without screaming, without resisting, without anyone at the house noticing until it was too late. If you think this sighting is the key to the case, drop a comment right now. Tell me if you believe Natasha Haywood really saw Lilly and Jack Sullivan that morning. Tell me if you think that woman with the sedan was Janie McKenzie or someone else entirely. Tell me if you believe these children are still alive somewhere or if you think this case has a much darker ending. Because this sighting is either the best lead investigators have, or it's a cruel coincidence that sent them chasing ghosts while the real answer was somewhere else entirely. Either way, the image of two small children holding hands as they walk toward an open car door on a rural Nova Scotia road haunts everyone who has heard this story. Those children trusted someone that morning. They walked willingly into a situation that ended with them vanishing completely. And whether that someone was family or a stranger, whether this was planned or opportunistic, the result is the same. Lilly and Jack Sullivan are gone, and that woman with the tan or gold sedan might be the only person who knows what really happened to them. When children go missing and the circumstances are suspicious, investigators have a standard protocol. They clear the family first. Not because they want to suspect the parents, not because they're heartless or cynical, but because statistically when a child is harmed, the perpetrator is usually someone close to them. Someone in the home. Someone with access and opportunity. So police work outward from the center, starting with parents and caregivers and eliminating them as suspects before expanding the search to strangers. In the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, that meant polygraph tests. Lots of them. The adults in these children's lives were going to be hooked up to machines that measure physiological responses, heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, skin conductivity, all the involuntary reactions that supposedly indicate when someone is lying. And the results of those polygraph tests would shape the direction of the entire investigation. Whether they should have is a different question entirely. On May 12, 2025, just 10 days after the children vanished, Malaya Brooks Murray and Daniel Martel drove to the Bible Hill RCMP detachment to take their polygraph examinations. Can you imagine what that car ride was like? Your children have been missing for 10 days. Every hour that passes makes it less likely they're alive. The community is searching. The media is covering the story. And now you're going to be interrogated by police, hooked up to a machine that's going to try to determine if you're lying about your involvement in your own children's disappearance. If you're innocent, it must be terrifying. The fear that the machine will malfunction, that your nervousness will be read as guilt, that you'll say something wrong and suddenly become a suspect when you should be treated as a grieving parent. But if you're guilty, if you know what happened to those kids, then this is a different kind of terror. The fear of being caught. The fear that all your preparation and planning and lying is about to be exposed by sensors and wires and a trained examiner who has heard every lie imaginable. Both Malaya and Daniel passed their polygraph tests. According to the reports, their results showed they were truthful. The specific questions they were asked have been redacted from the public documents, which is standard for ongoing investigations, but Daniel later told the Canadian press that his test focused on whether he had harmed the children. Did you hurt Lily? Did you hurt Jack? Do you know where they are? Do you know what happened to them? Those are the critical questions in a case like this. And according to the polygraph examiner, Daniel's physiological responses indicated he was telling the truth when he said no. Malaya apparently took her test to clear herself as a suspect, and she passed as well. An investigator wrote in the case file, quote, "Jack and Lily's disappearance is not believed to be criminal in nature," end quote. Based largely on these polygraph results, police were treating this as a missing persons case, not a homicide, not an abduction, not a crime at all. Just two kids who wandered off and couldn't be found. Here's the problem with that conclusion, and this is something I need every person watching this to understand because it's crucial to evaluating this case. Polygraphs are pseudoscience. They're not magic truth detectors. They're not infallible. In fact, they're so unreliable that they're not admissible as evidence in most courts. What polygraphs measure is stress, anxiety, physiological arousal. They assume that lying produces a specific pattern of stress that can be detected and differentiated from the stress of simply being interrogated. But that assumption is flawed. Some people can lie without any physiological response at all, especially if they're practiced, if they believe their own lies, or if they're sociopathic and don't experience normal guilt or anxiety. Other people can fail polygraph tests while telling the complete truth because they're nervous, because they're terrified of being wrongly accused, because they have anxiety disorders or medical conditions that affect their physiological responses. Polygraphs don't detect lies. They detect stress. And stress can come from 1,000 different sources that have nothing to do with guilt. Worse, polygraphs can be beaten. The information about how to manipulate your physiological responses to pass a polygraph test is readily available online. You can practice. You can learn techniques like subtly tensing muscles during control questions to elevate your baseline, then appearing calm during the relevant questions by comparison. You can use mental tricks, controlled breathing, even physical pain to alter your responses. Intelligence agencies, law enforcement, even criminal organizations know this. The polygraph is a tool, and like any tool, it's only as good as the person using it and the conditions under which it's used. The fact that Malaya and Daniel passed their polygraphs means very little except that they didn't exhibit the specific pattern of physiological responses that the examiner was trained to identify as deception. It doesn't mean they're innocent. It doesn't mean they didn't harm those children. It means they passed a flawed test. And yet, based primarily on these polygraph results, the RCMP concluded that the disappearance wasn't criminal. They were treating it as two children who walked off and got lost. They were searching the woods instead of investigating homicide. They were looking for bodies in mine shafts instead of building a case against the adults in that home. This is why I want you to comment right now and tell me if you think police made a mistake by trusting those polygraphs. Tell me if you think they should have kept investigating Malaya and Daniel as suspects regardless of what the machine said. Because in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people following this case, those polygraph results created tunnel vision. They caused investigators to dismiss leads and evidence that pointed toward family involvement because the polygraphs said the parents were truthful. But Malaya and Daniel weren't the only ones who took the test. Remember, there was another adult living on that property. Daniel's mother, Janie Mackenzie, the 60-year-old woman who lived in a camper right there on the same land where the children disappeared. On June 10, 2025, Janie went to take her polygraph examination. And unlike her son and his partner, she didn't pass. Her results came back inconclusive. The explanation given was that her, quote, physiology wasn't suitable for analysis, end quote. Now what does that mean? What makes someone's physiology unsuitable for polygraph analysis? According to polygraph examiners, there are several possibilities. Some people have medical conditions that affect their heart rate, blood pressure, or breathing in ways that make it impossible to establish a reliable baseline. Some people are on medications that alter their physiological responses. Some people are so anxious or so calm that their responses don't fit the expected patterns. And some people are so good at controlling their responses, either naturally or through practice, that the test can't get a clear reading. The report doesn't specify which category Janie fell into, and that ambiguity is significant. An inconclusive polygraph result doesn't mean someone is lying, but it also doesn't clear them the way a passing result theoretically does. Janie McKenzie remained a question mark in this investigation. Remember that Janie was one of the last people to claim she heard the children. She said she heard Lilly and Jack playing on the swings and laughing around 8:50 a.m. on May 2nd before she dozed off. If her timeline is accurate, that means the children were still alive and outside at that time. But what if her timeline isn't accurate? What if she's covering for someone, or what if she's directly involved? An inconclusive polygraph doesn't answer those questions. It just leaves them hanging there unresolved. And remember, Natasha Haywood described seeing children matching Lilly and Jack's general description with a woman in her 50s or 60s near an older sedan. Janie McKenzie is exactly in that age range. Could she have been the woman Natasha saw? Police have never publicly confirmed or denied this, which means either they haven't been able to connect those dots, or they have and it's part of their ongoing investigation. The polygraph test didn't stop with the immediate household. Investigators expanded outward, testing anyone who had close contact with the children or who might have had motive and opportunity. Malea's grandmother, Cindy Brooks Murray, and her boyfriend, Wade Paris, both took polygraphs on July 2, 2025. Both passed. Their results showed they were truthful when they denied involvement in the children's disappearance. This makes sense because they didn't live on the property, they weren't there that morning, and there's no evidence suggesting they had any role in what happened. But police were being thorough, eliminating every possible suspect, clearing everyone on the periphery so they could focus on the core group of people who had actual access to Lilly and Jack. And then there's Cody Sullivan, the biological father. This is where the case takes an interesting turn because Cody had every reason to be a prime suspect, at least on paper. He was the children's father. He had lost custody. He hadn't seen Lilly or Jack in 3 years after Malaya gained sole custody following their breakup. That kind of situation breeds resentment, anger, desperation. Fathers who lose custody sometimes snap. They sometimes decide that if they can't have their children, no one can. Or they convince themselves they're rescuing their kids from a bad situation and they take them without permission. Parental abduction is far more common than stranger abduction. So investigators had to look hard at Cody Sullivan. They had to consider whether this was a custody case gone violent. What they found was a man who had been completely removed from his children's lives, but not by choice. Cody had lost his construction job about 9 months before the children disappeared. With the job went his apartment and his vehicle. He was in financial ruin, struggling to survive, unable to pay child support, unable to maintain the kind of life that family court requires from non-custodial parents. He hadn't seen Lilly or Jack in 3 years. That's 1,000 days of missing birthdays, missing milestones, missing the everyday moments that make up a childhood. For a father who loved his kids, that must have been agonizing. But does agonizing loss translate to criminal action? Cody took his polygraph examination on June 12, 2025. He passed. His results confirmed what police had already been discovering through their investigation. Cody Sullivan had no contact with his children in the relevant time frame. He wasn't there. He didn't take them. He didn't harm them. He's a tragic figure in this case, a father who lost his kids years before they disappeared and who now has to live with the knowledge that he'll never get a chance to make things right, never get a chance to rebuild those relationships. But he's not a suspect. Interestingly, in the early hours of May 3 at 12:45 a.m., Malaya called police to suggest that maybe Cody had taken the kids to New Brunswick. Why would she suggest that? Was she genuinely worried that Cody might have been involved? Or was she trying to redirect police attention away from herself and Daniel? Investigators took the tip seriously. They went to Cody's home at 2:50 a.m. and found him there, right where he should be. No children. No evidence of any involvement. By mid-July 2025, investigators had conducted polygraph examinations on everyone in the children's immediate circle. Parents, stepfather, biological father, grandmother, great-grandmother, great-grandmother's boyfriend. Everyone passed except Janie, whose results were inconclusive. And based on those results, police were publicly stating that they didn't believe the disappearance was criminal in nature. They were treating it as a missing persons case, Not a murder, not an abduction. They were still searching woods and wells and mine shafts instead of building a criminal case. This is what happens when you rely too heavily on polygraph results. You convince yourself that because the machine said people were truthful, they must be truthful. You stop investigating angles that might be uncomfortable or difficult. You accept the story you're being told because the pseudoscience confirmed it. But here's what should have been happening instead. Investigators should have completely disregarded those polygraph results and continued investigating based on evidence, opportunity, timeline, and motive. Because the physical evidence, the torn blanket in 2 locations, the lack of scent trail, the suspicious timing, all of it points toward family involvement regardless of what any polygraph said. The deleted app on Malaya's phone, which we'll get into more detail later, is evidence of consciousness of guilt. The financial stress, the allegations of neglect, the chaotic home environment, those are factors that create motive. The fact that everyone in that house has a different story about what they heard and when they heard it suggests coordination, rehearsal, and cover-up, not the confusion of innocent people trying to remember a traumatic morning. Polygraphs are tools, but they're flawed tools. They should inform an investigation, not conclude it. And in the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, the decision to trust those polygraph results may have been the biggest mistake the RCMP made, because it allowed guilty parties to breathe easier, to feel confident that they'd beaten the system, to believe that they were going to get away with whatever they did to those children. If you believe police made a mistake by trusting those polygraphs, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what you think investigators should have done differently. Because this case is far from over, and public pressure, public attention, public refusal to accept the official narrative, that's what keeps investigators from closing cases prematurely. That's what keeps the search for truth alive when the easy answers turn out to be wrong. While the RCMP was conducting polygraph tests and searching the woods, journalists were starting to dig into the background of the Sullivan family and the home environment where Lilly and Jack had been living in the months and years before they disappeared. What they found was deeply troubling. This wasn't a case of 2 healthy, well-cared-for children who mysteriously vanished from a stable home. This was a case of children living in chaos, in neglect, in a situation that had been deteriorating for a long time before that morning in May. And when you understand the pressures that were building in that household, when you see the financial desperation and the dysfunction and the warning signs that everyone missed, you start to understand that this disappearance didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of a situation that had been spiraling out of control. If you're still with me, if you're committed to understanding the full truth of what happened to these children, subscribe to this channel right now. These are the details that explain motive, that explain why someone might do the unthinkable. These are the pieces that transform this from a mystery into a tragedy that maybe, just maybe, could have been prevented if someone had intervened sooner. Let's start with the money, because money, or the lack of it, is often at the heart of family crimes. Malaya Brooks Murray was receiving the Canada Child Benefit, a monthly payment from the federal government designed to help families with the cost of raising children. For a single mother with 3 kids, including 2 school-age children and a toddler, that benefit would have been substantial. Estimates put it at approximately $1,900 per month. That's not wealth, but in rural Nova Scotia where the cost of living is relatively low, it's significant money. It's money that pays for food, clothes, utilities, all the basics that kids need. For a family living in a mobile home, barely scraping by, that $1,900 a month would have been essential. It might have been the only reliable income keeping the household afloat. But here's the problem. In April 2025, just weeks before the children disappeared, that benefit stopped. Completely cut off. What? Because Daniel Martel hadn't filed his taxes by the April 30th deadline. Think about that for a moment. Daniel Martel, who wasn't even the biological father of these children, whose only legal connection to them was that he was Malaya's partner, had to file his taxes for Malaya to continue receiving benefits for her kids. That's how the Canada Child Benefit works. If you're living with a partner, their income has to be reported and they have to file taxes for the benefit to continue. Daniel didn't file. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he didn't have the documentation. Maybe he had reasons related to his own financial situation or legal issues that made him avoid filing. We don't know why. What we know is that his failure to file meant that on May 1, 2025, the day before Lilly and Jack disappeared, that household lost $1,900 in monthly income. Suddenly and completely. Bills don't stop. Rent doesn't stop. Food costs don't stop. But the money to pay for those things, that stopped. For a family already on the edge, already struggling, this would have been catastrophic. This would have created desperate pressure to find a solution, any solution. On top of the lost child benefit, there's the matter of child support from Cody Sullivan, the biological father. Cody had been paying what he could while he was employed in construction, but 9 months before the children disappeared, he lost his job. With the job went his ability to pay support. No job means no income means no child support payments. So Malaya wasn't just dealing with the loss of the Canada Child Benefit in April. She'd been dealing with the loss of Cody's child support payments for 9 months already. 2 separate income streams that had been supporting these children were gone. The financial pressure on that household must have been crushing. When people are desperate for money, when they can't see a way forward, when they feel trapped by circumstances, they sometimes make terrible decisions. They sometimes decide that the problem isn't the lack of money, the problem is the expenses. And in a household where children are expenses, where feeding them and clothing them and caring for them requires resources that aren't available anymore, that's a very dark place for thinking to go. Now let's talk about Daniel Martel specifically, because the Globe and Mail newspaper dropped some troubling details about him that paint a picture of a man who should never have been around children. There were reports, multiple reports from people who knew the family of Daniel's drug use. What drugs specifically? The reports don't detail, but in rural Nova Scotia, like in many rural areas, opioids and methamphetamine are epidemic problems. Drug use impairs judgment. It creates mood swings. It makes people paranoid, aggressive, unpredictable. A man who is actively using drugs is not someone who should be caring for small children, especially someone else's children. But Daniel was there in that home every day with access to Lilly and Jack, with authority over them, with the ability to do whatever he wanted behind closed doors. There were also reports of controlling behavior. This is a red flag in any relationship, but it's especially concerning in a home with children. Controlling partners isolate their victims. They make them dependent. They cut them off from family and support systems so that the victim feels they have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Was Malaya being controlled by Daniel? Was she so dependent on him, so isolated, that she couldn't protect her own children even if she wanted to? Or was she complicit, a willing participant in whatever happened? These are questions that the reports raise but can't definitively answer. What we know is that multiple people who knew the family described Daniel as controlling, and in domestic violence situations, control often escalates to abuse. And then there are the allegations of neglect or abuse toward the children themselves. People in the community, people who had seen Lilly and Jack, had concerns. Children going to bed late in their day clothes. A 4-year-old still in diapers. Kids being dragged through long errand days when they were sick. These are signs of neglect. These are signs that the children's basic needs weren't being prioritized. Neglect can be active, deliberately withholding care, or it can be passive, just not having the resources or energy or knowledge to provide proper care. Either way, it harms children. It creates an environment where they're vulnerable, where they're not thriving, where something terrible can happen and nobody intervenes because the slide toward that terrible thing was gradual, a slow accumulation of small failures until suddenly you're at a crisis point and it's too late to fix it. When investigators interviewed Malaya and Daniel about discipline, both of them denied using physical punishment. They said they didn't spank or hit the kids. Maybe that's true. But there are many forms of abuse that don't leave visible marks. Emotional abuse. Verbal abuse. Neglect itself is a form of abuse. And the fact that they felt the need to specifically state that they didn't use physical discipline suggests that investigators were asking pointed questions about how those children were being treated. You don't ask those questions unless you have reason to believe abuse was occurring. What did investigators see or hear that made them ask about discipline? What did the house look like when they searched it? What did neighbors or family members tell them about what went on in that mobile home? Let's talk about the living situation itself because it matters. This was a mobile home on rural property. Mobile homes are small. Walls are thin. Privacy is limited. If something violent or disturbing was happening inside that home, other people on the property would likely hear it. Janie McKenzie lived in a camper right there on the same land. Could she really not know what was going on in her son's home? Could she really be oblivious to neglect or abuse happening yards away from where she slept? Or did she know and choose to look the other way because Daniel was her son and she prioritized protecting him over protecting those children? The inconclusive polygraph result starts to make more sense when you consider that she might have been carrying the weight of knowledge she wasn't admitting. Knowledge creates stress. Stress affects physiology. Maybe her body was betraying what her words wouldn't confess. The mobile home itself, from what we can piece together from reports, was not well maintained. That wrench against the front door instead of a proper lock tells you something about the level of disrepair and the DIY approach to basic home security. The back sliding door with apparently no security at all. the draft that supposedly required a child's blanket to block. These are all signs of a property that was falling apart, of people who didn't have the resources or the motivation to keep their home in proper condition. Children deserve to live in safe, clean, secure environments. Lilly and Jack were living in a place where basic safety measures weren't even in place. Where a wrench was considered adequate security against bears and apparently against small children opening doors and wandering into the wilderness. Think about the daily reality of life in that home in the weeks before the disappearance. Money was gone or running out. Stress was high. Drug use was allegedly occurring. Control and possibly abuse were part of the family dynamic. The children were showing signs of neglect. And then the Canada Child Benefit got cut off, removing the last financial safety net. In that environment, with those pressures, what happens when someone decides they can't do this anymore? What happens when someone decides the children are the problem and not the symptom? What happens when desperation meets opportunity meets a moral compass that's already been compromised by drug use and financial stress and a relationship dynamic built on control rather than healthy partnership? What happens is exactly what investigators feared was happening even if they couldn't prove it yet. Someone makes a decision. Someone decides that the only way out of this impossible situation is to remove the children from the equation. And on the morning of May 2, 2025, someone did exactly that. Now I want to be clear. Financial stress alone doesn't make people murderers. Plenty of families struggle with money and would never, ever harm their children. Drug use alone doesn't make people murderers. Plenty of people with addiction issues love their children and keep them safe even while they're battling their demons. But when you combine financial desperation with drug use, with controlling behavior, with allegations of neglect, with a household that's barely functional, with benefits being cut off at exactly the wrong moment, you create a perfect storm. You create conditions where someone who might not otherwise be capable of harming children becomes capable of it. You create a pressure cooker environment where the worst possible outcomes become tragically more likely. The Globe and Mail's reporting on these family dynamics was important because it shifted the public narrative. Up until those details emerged, there was a lot of sympathy for Malaya and Daniel. They were seen as grieving parents whose children had wandered off. There were fundraisers, there was community support, there was an assumption of innocence and tragedy. But when people learned about the drug use, the neglect, the financial desperation, the controlling behavior, public opinion started to shift. People started asking harder questions. Why weren't child services involved before this happened? Why didn't anyone report the neglect? Why were these children still in that home if conditions were so bad? And most importantly, what really happened to Lilly and Jack? Because the idea that they just wandered off started to seem less and less plausible when you understood the context they were living in. Malaya hasn't spoken publicly since early May. After the disappearance, after the initial search, after the media attention became overwhelming, she left Lansdowne Station. She took Baby Meadow and went to stay with family somewhere else, away from the property, away from the mobile home, away from the place where her two older children had last been seen. Some people see this as understandable. The place held traumatic memories. The media was camped outside. She needed space to grieve. But others see it as suspicious. Why leave? Why abandon the place where your children disappeared? What if they come back and you're not there? What if searchers find something and you're hours away? A mother whose children are missing usually can't be dragged away from the last place she saw them. She usually stays, hoping, praying, waiting for any sign of them. The fact that Malaya left suggests either she knew they weren't coming back, or she couldn't bear to stay in a place that reminded her of what she'd done. Daniel, on the other hand, stayed. He remained at the mobile home on Gearlock Road, living there through the summer as the investigation continued. He gave occasional statements to the media, always maintaining his innocence, always saying he had nothing to hide. He told CBC, quote, "They know my life inside and out," end quote. He was referring to investigators, to the fact that police had gone through everything, his phone records, his finances, his movements, his relationships. He was presenting himself as an open book, someone with nothing to conceal. But that statement can be read two ways. Either he really was innocent and confident that the investigation would clear him, or he was so confident in his cover-up, so sure that he'd hidden the evidence well enough, that he didn't think investigators could touch him even if they knew his life inside and out. The home they left behind, that mobile home on Gearlock Road, became a crime scene even though police weren't officially treating it as a crime. It was searched multiple times. Evidence was collected. But the most important evidence, the evidence of what happened to Lilly and Jack, wasn't there. Or if it was there, it was hidden so well that investigators couldn't find it. The home became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. A symbol of neglect and dysfunction and missed opportunities to intervene. A symbol of two children who deserved better than what they got. And now that home sits there, a memorial to questions without answers, to a family that imploded in the worst possible way, to the moment when all the stress and all the pressure and all the bad decisions finally crashed together and two innocent kids paid the price. If you're angry right now, if you're frustrated by how these children were failed by the adults who should have protected them, leave a comment and tell me what you're feeling. Tell me if you think child services should have been involved sooner. Tell me if you think this tragedy could have been prevented if anyone, had cared enough to report the neglect before it was too late. Because Lilly and Jack deserved better. They deserved a home that was safe. They deserved adults who put their needs first. They deserved a chance to grow up. And they didn't get any of that. In modern investigations, especially those involving missing persons, digital evidence has become as important as physical evidence. Your phone knows where you've been. Your computer knows what you've searched. Your apps know who you've talked to and what you've said. In the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, digital evidence was about to reveal something that would dramatically shift how investigators and the public viewed this case. Because while Malaya Brooks Murray was telling police she had no idea what happened to her children, while she was passing polygraph tests and presenting herself as a devastated mother, she was also deleting evidence. Specifically, she deleted an app from her phone. Not just any app. An app called Text Plus. And the timing of that deletion and what that app was capable of would raise questions that Malaya has never adequately answered. Before we go deeper into this digital smoking gun, I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to engage with this video. Like it, comment on it, share it with someone who cares about justice for missing children. Because cases like this get solved when enough people pay attention, when enough pressure builds, when investigators know the public is watching and demanding answers. Your engagement matters. So take 5 seconds right now and hit that like button, and then let's talk about what Malaya was hiding on her phone. Text Plus is a communication app that provides users with secondary phone numbers. You download it, you create an account, and suddenly you have a phone number that's not your regular cell number. You can use this number to make calls and send texts over Wi-Fi or data, completely separate from your regular phone service. Now, there are legitimate reasons people use apps like Text Plus. Maybe you're selling something online and don't want to give out your real number. Maybe you're dating and want to maintain privacy until you trust someone. Maybe you want a separate number for work purposes. These are all reasonable uses. But Text Plus is also widely used for less legitimate purposes. People use it to communicate secretly with someone their partner doesn't know about. They use it to conduct business they don't want traced to their real identity. They use it when they want plausible deniability. If you're found out, you can claim the number isn't yours, that someone must have been using your phone, that you don't know anything about those messages. Here's what makes Text Plus particularly interesting from an investigative standpoint. Unlike apps with end-to-end encryption like Signal or WhatsApp, Text Plus stores messages on their servers. That means even if you delete the app from your phone, even if you delete individual messages, those communications still exist somewhere. They're sitting on Text Plus's servers, and with the proper legal warrants, law enforcement can access them. This is both good news and bad news for Malaya. The good news for her was that by deleting the app, she removed immediate evidence from her phone. Think about what could have been on that app. Who was Malaya communicating with using a secondary phone number that she didn't want traced to her regular phone? Was she talking to someone about the children? Was she making arrangements? Was she coordinating with someone to take the kids somewhere? Was she discussing money? The possibilities are chilling, and every single one of them suggests premeditation. Because you don't need a secret communication channel unless you're discussing things you don't want discovered. You don't delete that app right after your kids disappear unless there are messages on it that would implicate you in their disappearance. Investigators filed record access orders, which are legal demands for companies to turn over user data. By mid-July 2025, the RCMP had filed 12 separate record access orders related to this case. They were going after everything. Phone records showing who called who and when. Bank transactions showing where money went and what it was used for. GPS data showing where people were at specific times. And critically, they were after the data from Malaya's deleted Text Plus app. They wanted to know who she was talking to. They wanted to see the messages. They wanted timestamps. They wanted to build a timeline of communications that would either clear Malaya or damn her. The process of getting that data is slow. Companies don't just hand over user information immediately. They have privacy policies. They have legal departments that review every warrant to make sure it's valid. They have technical processes for extracting and formatting data. It can take months to get responses, especially for a case that's not officially a criminal investigation yet. Remember, police were still publicly saying they didn't believe the disappearance was criminal in nature, which means they couldn't use the most aggressive legal tools available for homicide investigations. They were working in a gray area, trying to gather evidence while not yet having enough evidence to justify treating this as a murder case. But they were clearly suspicious. You don't file 12 record access orders if you think kids just wandered off into the woods. Beyond the Text Plus app, investigators were looking at all of Malaya and Daniel's digital lives. They pulled phone records going back months looking for patterns. Who were they calling regularly? Were there any calls to unusual numbers? Were there calls to people who might be involved in child trafficking? Were there calls that stopped suddenly around the time the children disappeared, suggesting those contacts were only relevant for a specific purpose? They looked at text messages from Malaya's regular phone number, the messages she hadn't deleted, searching for context, for hints about her state of mind, for discussions about money or stress or the children themselves. They examined bank transactions and financial records, building a picture of the family's economic situation. How much money was coming in? Where was it going? Were there unusual transactions right before or after the disappearance? Had Malaya or Daniel withdrawn large amounts of cash that couldn't be accounted for? Had they paid someone for something? Had they purchased anything that might be relevant like garbage bags, cleaning supplies, tools? Financial records tell stories. They reveal priorities and secrets and sometimes crimes. GPS data from their phones was also subpoenaed. Modern smartphones track your location constantly unless you specifically disable that function, and most people don't disable it because they use apps that require location services. Where was Malaya on May 1st and May 2nd? Does her GPS data match her stated timeline? Where was Daniel? Were they in locations they claimed not to be in? Did they drive somewhere that they haven't told investigators about? GPS data can confirm or destroy alibis. It's objective. It doesn't lie or misremember. Your phone knows where you went, and investigators were determined to find out if those locations matched the story Malaya and Daniel had been telling. They also requested footage from school buses serving Salt Springs Elementary, the school where Lily should have been enrolled. They wanted to see if the kids had been riding the bus in the days and weeks before they disappeared. They wanted to understand the routine, the normal pattern of life so they could identify anything that broke that pattern. Had the children stopped going to school before May 2nd? Had anyone noticed they were missing from the bus? Sometimes the clues to a crime are hiding in the disruption of normal routines, the moments when something that should have happened didn't happen and nobody noticed until it was too late. As of mid-July 2025, the investigation had generated an astounding amount of tips and potential evidence. The RCMP had received 740 tips from the public, people calling in to report sightings or suspicions or information they thought might be relevant. Every single one of those tips had to be investigated, followed up, either confirmed or ruled out. That's hundreds of hours of investigative work, hundreds of dead ends, and maybe, hopefully, a few leads that might actually pan out. They also collected 9,300 videos from the public. Think about that number. 9,300 videos. These would be security camera footage from homes and businesses in the area, dashcam footage from drivers who were on the roads that day, cell phone videos people took that might have inadvertently captured something important. Every single one of those videos had to be reviewed by the Northeast Nova Major Crime Unit, the specialized team that had taken over the investigation. Investigators had to watch thousands of hours of footage, looking for a glimpse of Lilly and Jack, looking for vehicles that might be connected to their disappearance, looking for anything that didn't fit, anything suspicious, anything that might crack this case open. This is what a major investigation looks like in the modern era. It's not just searching woods and interviewing witnesses. It's drowning in data, in digital breadcrumbs that people leave everywhere they go. And somewhere in those phone records, in those bank transactions, in those GPS coordinates, in those deleted app messages, investigators believed they would find the truth. They believed the digital evidence would reveal what the physical evidence and the witness statements and the polygraph tests couldn't. They believed that Malaya's decision to delete that Text Plus app was going to be her undoing, because she didn't delete the messages. She only deleted her access to them. The messages still existed, sitting on a server somewhere, waiting to be subpoenaed, waiting to reveal who she was really talking to and what she was really planning in the days before her children vanished. As the summer of 2025 wore on, as the woods were searched again and again with no results, as tips came in and were investigated and led nowhere, the focus of this case was increasingly shifting to the digital realm. Because the physical world wasn't giving up its secrets. Whatever happened to Lilly and Jack, whoever took them, whoever harmed them, They had been careful enough or lucky enough that the traditional methods of investigation weren't producing results. So what happens now? The investigation continues. Digital evidence is being processed. The text plus messages will eventually be recovered and reviewed. GPS data will be analyzed. Financial records will be examined for anything suspicious. And slowly, methodically, investigators are building a case. They're not rushing because they know they only get one shot at this. If they charge someone and the case falls apart in court, double jeopardy rules mean they can't try again even if new evidence emerges later. So they're being patient. They're being thorough. They're making sure that when they finally do make arrests, the case is airtight. But I believe arrests are coming. I believe the evidence will reach a point where prosecutors feel confident moving forward. And I believe that eventually Malaya Brooks Murray and possibly Daniel Martel will face a jury and be held accountable for what they did to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Until that day comes, all we can do is remember. Remember two children who deserved better. Remember that Lilly loved her pink LOL doll blanket enough that it was noted by everyone who knew her. Remember that Jack was still learning and growing, still in that phase where he needed protection and patience. Remember that they giggled together that last morning, or at least someone heard giggling and claimed it was them. Remember that they held hands, if Natasha Haywood really saw them, walking toward whatever fate awaited them with the trust that children have in the adults who control their world. That trust was betrayed. Their innocence was stolen. Their futures were erased. And nothing we do now can fix that. But we can demand justice. We can refuse to forget. We can make sure their names stay alive and their story stays told until the truth finally, completely, undeniably comes out. Thank you for following Lilly and Jack Sullivan's story to the end. If this case moved you, if it made you angry or sad or determined to see justice done, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we cover cases that deserve to be heard, cases where justice is still being sought, cases where public attention can make a difference. Share your thoughts, your feelings, and your final theory in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you think Malaya and Daniel will ever be charged. Tell me if you believe those children are still alive or if you think, like I do, that they're gone. Tell me what you think should happen to the people responsible. And most importantly, keep Lilly and Jack in your thoughts. Say their names. Share their story. Don't let them become just another statistic, just another cold case, just another tragedy that fades from memory. They were real children with real lives and real potential. They mattered. They still matter. And they deserve justice, even if justice comes too late to save them. Rest in peace, Lilly and Jack Sullivan. The world didn't protect you, but the world won't forget you.